To introduce our next speaker, Priscilla Naidoo, and she will be presenting on the topic ABCs of government events, all protocol observed. As a public relations officer to President Nelson Mandela, Priscilla Naidoo started her career as a public servant in 1994. After a memorable 5 years with the world's icon, she continued to work in government in protocol and ceremonial affairs. And prior to joining government, she has worked in film and television. After completing her master's degree in cinema studies at New York University, USA, she had concurrent internships at the Museum of Modern Art, New York, as well as Merchant Ivory Productions. During her internship, she was a runner in post-production in the Academy Award-winning film Howard's End, starring Anthony Hopkins and Emma Thompson. She continued to do so much work in that space, and she often assisted in events management and protocol at exhibitions at the Merchant Ivory Estate at Claverack, upstate New York, in the USA, as well as film screenings in New York, USA, and in London. Yeah? Nice. It was therefore not surprising when President Nelson Mandela retired in 1999, she was attracted to and took up the position in the protocol and ceremonial unit. Since then, she has enjoyed working in the protocol and ceremonial unit locally and abroad. Her comprehensive speaker profile is on the app, so I'm not going to take up too much of your time. I'm going to ask Priscilla to come forward and maybe she can just share some of the great memories that she has had working with the former statesman. So it's over to you, and please welcome her with a round of applause.
Thank you, Program Director. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be here at the 30th SAACI Annual Congress and wish to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to speak to you this afternoon. 30 years is an important milestone. In 1986, the law would have prevented me from standing at this lectern delivering a speech in this city. We've come a long, long way in our political democracy, and so has SAACI. With the new era of democracy came a huge increase in tourism, international conferences, multilateral government summits, world congresses, and other smaller events. More significantly, these conferences, congresses, and summits created opportunities for businesses and jobs like events management. They have even redefined how the presidency interfaces with events management, and so protocol in the highest office in the land since 1994 has evolved with this growth of this industry. We are so grateful for the leadership of our dear beloved father of our nation, Nelson Mandela, who was instrumental in leading us to our freedom. Because Nelson Mandela was an international icon, the beauty and history of South Africa brought many visitors, academics, and companies into South Africa, and it gave events organizers a lease of life they could never, ever have imagined. We now have so many conference centers around the country, both big and small, and that is quite amazing. I've been invited to speak to you on the ABCs of government events, all protocol observed. My career in government spanned 22 years, as the program director had mentioned. I first began as public relations officer to President Mandela in 1994, and at that time the protocol was the line function of the Department of Foreign Affairs. The Office of President Mandela did not have a dedicated protocol team, as we know it today. So protocol in the Office of President Mandela evolved by default after we had an overwhelming number of official visits and high-level international dignitaries. By 1997, our public liaison and ceremonial team assisted in protocol. They filled the vacuum, especially in the domestic area and later internationally. My own role too evolved because as one of the few support officials attached to the President, both locally and internationally, I found myself doing what I would now consider protocol duties, for instance, receiving and conducting VIP guests to the President's Lounge at the official and private residence, as well as places of accommodation abroad. This hands-on experience, coupled with formal protocol training, placed me in good stead when I moved to head the protocol team in 1999. So from 1994 to the present, I've realized the importance of having highly experienced events organizers. For the success or failure of a conference depends, amongst other things, on you, the conference organizers and events coordinators. For instance, when you have a dignitary, like a head of state, you will find that there are many pitfalls, obstacles, and last-minute planning to deal with. So it's very important that you have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. I'm sure that many of you will be familiar with some of the issues I'm going to raise, having had the experience of having invited the head of state or some other high-level dignitary. Because officials in the presidency continue to give feedback on problems or challenges that have occurred, I would like to highlight just a few. I thought today I should discuss some of the problems relating to an invitation to the head of state, forms of address, seating arrangements, team support, a holding room, and negotiation skills. If it's a major conference hosted by government, then generally it is at a head of state level. So I'm focusing today on a head of state. Even if it's not your role to send an invitation to the speakers, it's important that when you have your initial planning meetings, that you think about some of the problems I'll be talking to you about. For example, one of the biggest problems that we have encountered is that there is this poor public relations when conference organizers place big advertisements in newspapers or television or radio, inviting participation of either members of the public or stakeholders. And prominent in this advertisement is that the keynote address will be delivered by the head of state of the Republic. I'm so pleased that this year's theme for your Congress is "With knowledge, it's possible." Indeed, if you do have knowledge of how government works, then you will be running a smooth and successful conference. So I want to give you a scenario. The organizers of a world conference on trade, let's say, the International Chamber of Commerce, plans to have another World Congress in South Africa. And this time they asked the events coordinators, together with the host Chamber of Commerce, to invite the President of the Republic to open the International Chamber of Commerce World Congress. Well, generally the President of the ICC should be the person responsible to write the letter of invitation, signs it, but it doesn't matter who sends it to the private office of the President. So at this stage, I want to point out some of the mistakes that are made during this invitation to the President. There are simple rules of protocol that have to be observed. So you would say, for instance, His Excellency, Mr. J.G. Zuma, the President of the Republic of South Africa. But you never say the State President, which is the old government title. The Constitutional reflects it as President. The other important information, so we speak about the invitation as it is His Excellency, to His Excellency. But when you speak and address the President, you would say, Your Excellency, Mr. President. Or on the invitation, Dear Mr. President. But there's another term that we often find so regularly, and it's the word the Honorable. Now, the Honorable is never used when addressing a head of state, because, as you're aware, the head of state is not a member of Parliament. In the House of the National Assembly, the Honorable is used amongst the parliamentarians, but it is most important for the judiciary. For example, you say the Honorable Chief Justice, Mr. Mogoeng, but never use the word Honorable when referring to the head of state of South Africa. Today you have the Minister of Tourism address you, and those planning would have got the minister to the podium with some sort of arrangements prior to the address. However, with the head of state, the event management would have had to deal with a larger group or team. You have support personnel of the head of state, the protocol, media liaison, a large security cluster group, and personal support. Now, these may appear to be a very large team, but actually it's a small core team that works in the field with the principal. In order to have a successful event that involves government, especially the head of state, you will encounter people who will make demands on you. They will demand information and expect you to deliver at very short notice. You must understand the requirements of the head of the state and the support team. So you need to think out of the box, find solutions to problems. This is especially important when it comes to the running order of the program, the speaking order, and the timing. There's also entertainment, the content of the program. Where does the national anthem be played or rendered? The length of speech of the head of state. When a government official makes those demands or tries to negotiate with you, you need to understand that they are taking instructions from top management as they come to you with a mandate which they cannot shift. So this is when your negotiation skills have to become very, very important. When a head of state is opening your conference or is the keynote speaker, try and limit the number of other speakers during the session. Protocol will deal with the minute-by-minute program and logistics of the principal from the time the head of state arrives at the venue until departure. Therefore, it is important that you understand that every minute is precious. Don't be surprised if you're contacted by different support staff from the very same office. Each one has a different role and responsibility. The communications team, a member may contact you and say, I'm going to send you a matrix and you need to complete this. And in that matrix, they would ask you, what is your target audience? What is the theme of your conference? How many participants? The guest list, the venue setup. And they would also indicate that the principal will be speaking for 30 minutes and they would like you to do a draft speech. The protocol, on the other hand, they would contact you and they would talk about the running order, who is in the receiving party, the format of the program, and generally for government, there is a program that we usually use. So if you've worked, and perhaps you have, it's usually the premier of the province where the event is taking place, usually extends a word of welcome. The line function minister invites the head of state to address the gathering, and the executive mayor or district mayor, depending on where the city or district where the event is taking place, will extend a vote of thanks. Now, of course, if there's a dinner, then you would have the vote of thanks after the dessert is served. But one thing that's important to remember is that the head of state is never introduced. So we try and avoid the long biography for the head of state. As soon as the line function minister has invited the head of state to take the podium, that's very short. So we discourage the biographies. Because sometimes with our leaders, it becomes a very long biography and people are there to actually listen to the address. The other issue is praise singers. If you have to have a praise singer, then you need to consult widely on this matter because of the language and perhaps the political affiliation. There could be all kinds of sensitive matters. So it's important to consult with the team of the head of state. And usually when there's entertainment, it's presented prior to or after, or at the end, when closing the program. There's a very important issue that I want to bring to your notice, and that is when a head of state is participating in your program, there will be a large contingent of security and those metal detectors. So if you're going to have this head of state attending, make sure that in your invitation or advisory to your delegates or to your guests, indicate that you are going to start at a certain time to allow and factor in the time delay, because if you can imagine 500 guests going through 2 metal detectors, it could take a long time. So we actually would encourage you to think about this when you're planning, so that you know, the head of state has arrived, he's sitting in the holding room, waiting to be given the signal to be conducted into the hall, and he's waiting, and other guests think, well, the head of state is late, but actually he's waiting because of this delay. And unfortunately, security have to do their job, and there are no shortcuts. We are dealing with the head of state, so it's important. Another very important issue that I want to bring to you is the sign language interpreter. Since that unfortunate incident at the Mandela Memorial, where the sign language interpreter was not vetted, he was not accredited, he was not registered, and actually many people didn't know what he was saying or signing. It was a very, very embarrassing international, negative publicity that we received, and therefore it's important that any sign language interpreter is accredited, and we will feel so comfortable with that arrangement. And everywhere we go, our planning team always asks the question about the sign language interpreter. So it's important to note that the head of state is the keynote speaker. And once the head of state concludes the address, there should only be that very brief vote of thanks, because there's no one in the protocol precedence that speaks after the president. You have in some places where you have a dignitary delivering a vote of thanks, and it could be even longer than the head of state speech. So we need to ensure that these are managed very well. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, at the gala dinner, the vote of thanks would follow after the dessert is served. Unless, of course, the head of state is not serving dinner or lunch, then it will be afterwards. So if you've already firmed up your program, and later the team supporting this demanding team I spoke about earlier, if they come to you and say they want to make recommendations to reduce your important international speakers, and at this time, you need to use your negotiation and persuasive skills in negotiating with that support team in order that you have a win-win solution. Because sometimes you might have a major sponsor who may want to say a few words, and we come up with government as this bureaucracy of these 3 key speakers. So you need to use that. In fact, I've got a name of a book. It's called Getting to Yes with Yourself by William Ury. I'm sure all of you have read it by now. It's an excellent book on negotiation skills. And later I'll give you a quote from there, which is it's quite remarkable. So there's another important thing that you need to observe in terms of protocol, and that is the national anthem. For many, it will be just the national anthem, because of course it has to be rendered at government functions. But it's very important for the program director, the MC, and the sound technicians, and the choir who are rendering this national anthem to be aware of this, that the signal to commence the singing of the national anthem is when the announcement is made of the arrival into the hall of the head of state, and that is done by the program director when he invites all guests to rise and remains for the arrival of the president, and to remain standing for the rendition of the national anthem. The precise moment is when the head of state is standing at the designated seat. Remember that if the national anthem commences while the head of state is moving towards his seat, the head of state will stop and wait till the rendition is over. So it's important to know and understand exactly I just want to share with you something that happened, an incident that happened in Washington, D.C. with President Zuma. It was a fundraising dinner. It was the President's birthday fundraising dinner. And as I mentioned exactly how the President, everything was perfect. President proceeded to the seat, conducted, and as he stood at the seat, the choir, who was rendering the South African national anthem on that day, ran onto the stage and started singing "Sho Sholosa." And at that moment, all we could hear was the President saying, "Now what is that?" And I was at the back of the room, and I could have just ran out of the room. It was just so embarrassing. And you know that the protocol had listened to this choir, and they were perfect. The embassy in Washington confirmed that they were excellent, but who would have thought that they would not be standing on the stage at that moment and come on stage? And it was actually so embarrassing. Not only for us, but we had another international head of state present who actually, I may want to say something about that as well, because it's important for events management. So this head of state heard earlier in the day that it was the President's birthday, and he decided that he was going to come. He heard, they found out where the venue was, and he came in, and the protocol conducted him to a seat. But then, in tow, an entourage of about 40 people, and there were empty seats. And the reason for the empty seats was quite clear, because President Zuma was in another room hosting a reception for the VIP sponsors. And they were now being conducted into this hall where they were going to be seated. So I'm saying this, that when the VIP sponsors came in, there were very few seats for them. And some of them actually left because they wouldn't be standing. But it's important for events management to ensure that any ushers that are standing at the doors and conducting the guests should make sure that guests who are, have invitations should be able to come into, or if they don't have invitations, they should be stopped at the doors. But I find that a lot of ushers will just say, please proceed, and you have lots of unexpected guests. So it was actually very important. The head of state that was the guest did not gate crash. You know, he told the President in advance that he was coming, but it's actually quite embarrassing for, for us. But at the end of the day, everything went well, except for the few VIP guests who left. But I hope that, that is something that you'll take with you when you leave here. Another important issue I wanted to mention is the official photographer that you may have. The events organizers usually have an official photographer, and that the government has its own official photographer, and then you may have media representatives as well. So it's something that we discourage, is that when the head of state is seated and enjoying conversation and dinner or lunch, the meal, that there shouldn't be photographs being taken at that time. Negotiate in advance for the main table guests to have their photographs in the holding room, because that would be a private space, and you can have many more of these as well. I want to mention something. I know I have just 5 minutes or 4 minutes, so I want to quickly go through something very important. I want to take international dates that events managers must consider when you are setting up or planning your big event. I think it's very important that you look at calendars. For instance, the United Nations General Assembly, every year, the 3rd week of September, it takes place. The AU, the African Union Summit in Ethiopia in January. So you need to be cautious of this and look at these important dates so that it doesn't clash with those of the head of state. Or we might have a BRICS summit in South Africa, or like we have now, coming up soon, is the International AIDS Conference in Durban. So look at these dates in your calendar when you're planning your event, so that it doesn't clash, doesn't cause embarrassment to our head of state, because sometimes you advertise these, as I mentioned earlier, indicating that the keynote address is being delivered by the head of state of the Republic, and then of course a minister is assigned, because nothing wrong with that, but the head of state could not be there for whatever roundtable meeting or whatever it is. But it's something important that you need to look at as well, as international dates and calendar dates. Another important government website that you need to look at, I'm sure all of you, I've looked at the list of delegates, and quite impressive, and I'm sure all of you know this website. It's www.gov.za. It has all the details of all the government contacts, and please, if somebody is your relative or friend who works for the head of state, don't even bother, because go through that website, send your invitation so that it gets to the right person, who then moves that invitation in the right direction. For instance, we would send it through to a line function minister for recommendation, because so many people invite the president, but we don't know who some organizations are. So it's important for the line function minister to give some information and confirmation. The holding room is very important, because the president may want to have a private conversation, or may want to make or take a call privately. So we need that, and it's also a place where the receiving party can also have a short briefing. Seating is very important, so if you have the head of state on the stage, try and have odd number chairs, because that way you have the head of state center. If you have even numbers, it becomes very complicated, so use odd numbers. It works out much better for protocol, because then there's arguments, and you don't want arguments. You want a very pleasant event. So then there's, at a round table, at a dinner, you want to be aware that security will ask for seats at the adjacent tables, and sometimes you may have a fundraising dinner and you already have the tables are full. So the close protector just needs a space, doesn't need to enjoy dinner, just needs to have something to focus on, and that's the head of state. So it's important. So I want to, as I conclude, I want to say something about an anecdote about a seating arrangement at an old mutual special anniversary many years ago. So the private secretary to President Mandela was contacted by the events company organizing this dinner and wanted confirmation of the accompanying person who would be with the president. The private secretary just said, well, it's Priscilla Naidoo. So on the day I arrived at the dinner ahead of the principal, and I was so shocked. I found myself, now my name was seated next to the head of state. And I quickly called the host and said, please, I need to sit somewhere else. Can you please find a lady guest to sit next to President Mandela? And of course they found this lady guest. And to my horror, that weekend, my name appeared in Hogarth, in the Sunday Times. And nobody wants to be in Hogarth, because usually it's really a negative, that column. So, and everybody said, no, read it. It was actually quite a positive story, because the lady guest was so appreciative of me giving up my seat to accommodate her, that it was like a dream for her, and she was over the moon. So that was something that happened a long time ago. But what is important to note for you is that the accompanying guest should be a spouse or partner, but anybody else in a support role would be in attendance. So you need to note that and not make the mistake of that other events company who put me next to the president. So I mentioned earlier about the book, Getting to Yes with Yourself by William Yogi. And in that book, he has a quote by President Theodore Roosevelt, and it says, if you could kick that person in the pants responsible for most of your trouble, you wouldn't sit for a month. So it's us, who provide our own obstacles. So I hope that I've given you a few tools to keep handy so that equipped with this knowledge, it is possible for you to interact and successfully execute an event attended by a head of state where all protocol will be observed and your milestones achieved. I thank you. Mayor, I brought a few of these flags, and this is the African Union flag, which we use in May every year. So I've left it with the room assistants, and hope, it's just a few I have, so the lucky ones will get that. Thank you.
I was going to ask you a question, Priscilla, about why people in government, after they finish their speech, they say, I thank you. Why don't they just say, thank you? Like, this is me saying it, says, I already. Because you just did it. Anyway, all protocol observed, I thank you. Folks.